welcome to King Arthur and Lady of the Lake with myself, Helen Glover, and
Michael Lauria. I thought you knew my name. That's funny.
Today we're going to be talking about chivalry. Is it dead or did we kill it? And this is a topic I've been dying to talk about for such a long time. So I'm really, really pleased to bring this to this format, Michael, so that we can discuss the difficulty that we have showing up together in our gender, in politeness, really, which is what chivalry is all about, and the difficulty that men find when they are chivalrous in our environment and what that looks like and how it makes them feel, and the nervousness and the stress around whether they're actually allowed to be polite or not. And then for me as a woman, really would love that to happen. And so what's the conversation around that? So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Michael.
Yeah, I think chivalry is one of those things that has copped a bit of flack over the last few years, especially around, and I know we're going to go to these places in these conversations that we have, so I know it's okay to say this, but especially in the last 5 to 10 years, since feminism has taken on a very different slant, and it's very different to what feminism was back in the 60s and 70s. That was about women's rights, and that was all good, but I think that's gone a little bit too far now, and it's gone to, well, and a lot of women are out there saying, well, no, I can open the door myself. And it's like, yes, we know you can open the door yourself. Obviously, you're capable of opening the car door, right? But this is an act of service. It's an act of courtesy. It's an act of, let me do something for you. And men in relationships and in interactions with women like to feel needed in some way. And it's almost like women are taking that purpose away. And that chivalrous aspect is something that I think is very important in intimate relationships and in that courting between a man and a woman as well. Because at the end of the day, when we get down to the core of intimate relationships between a man and a woman, a man wants to serve and a woman wants to be served, right? And so when we take that aspect away, which is that chivalrous aspect in a man that serves, I wonder what that does to a relationship. Because then what I've found is that over the years, men stop doing things because women say, well, I can open the car door on my own. That's fine. You don't need to do it. I can change the light bulb. I can do this. I can do that. And then a man goes, well, what do you need me for? And then we lose that sense of purpose within the relationship. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But
yeah,
from a man, I've never experienced it, but lots of men have. So I'm lucky in the fact that I haven't experienced it, but many men have, and they get frustrated and it turns up in problems in their relationship.
Yeah, and I've spoke to a couple of guys who say they have a nervousness around it, that there's almost kind of like, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And I've really heard that, and that's really landed with me. And to be honest, as you said, the feminist movement, through the kind of aggression and the pressure and the movement, we gain what we need for our society. And then we will always have parts of that then moves too far. It needs to come back to balance. And I know for me, we have real kind of deep ancestral ways of being, and of course they adjust and change with our times. And I think it's like where women back in the day, chivalry for women was to be submissive, where that's very different now. We're more, but we are still receptive. I prefer that receptive rather than submissive. So that then if somebody opens the car door for me, or opens the door for me, or brings me flowers, or puts a jacket on me when I'm cold, I feel really special. It makes me feel really great, and I really enjoy that. And I know most of my women friends, if they have somebody do that, they go, oh, he's a keeper. It's almost a respect, and he sees me as a woman and I enjoy being a woman. So there's that real beauty in allowing ourselves to fall into that masculine trait, which is really beautiful. It's a holding. And that's the part that I really like about it. And I think it's a shame that we've made it a gender conversation as to whether we can open the door ourselves or not. Of course we can. But it goes much deeper than that. And it really buys into what you're talking about with the hero's journey. It's about a man feeling that hero stance, that he can do something,
Mm,
that and that then it's received, and both people feel good about that, you know.
yeah. I'd like to ask you a question on that, because you spoke into it's a feeling of holding, and a feeling of holding is a feeling of being held. And I wonder if unconsciously that's a feeling of I'm protected, I'm looked after, he cares, you
Mm,
know.
mm,
And I wonder if that, if we speak into that a little bit deeper, is that, do you think, a core need for a woman in a relationship with a man to feel like she's held, supported, um, not, I wouldn't say looked after, but definitely supported? And so what that really means is that I know that if the shit hits the fan, that you're going to be there in that small act of putting your coat around my shoulders because it's cold, or changing a light globe because you don't want me to get up on the chair. Not that that's an occupational health and safety
yeah,
issue, is it?
yeah,
Getting up on the
yeah.
chair and perhaps falling, even though I probably won't. Whatever it is, whatever the intent behind it is, I wonder if that's a feeling of being supported and held and protected almost.
Mm.
Do you
When
think?
I was a little girl, my dad always used to put me on the inside, and he would walk on the roadside when we were
Yeah,
walking hand in hand. And
yeah,
I loved that. And I'll remember it to this day, that I felt like he's got me. You
yeah,
know, my dad is prepared to put himself roadside for me to
mm,
remain safe. And so
yeah,
there's a subliminal kind of love message in that, and it is that core need of safety and security. And underneath that, there's a specialness, there's a love, there's a softness in, you know, a little girl looking up to this big guy who's the man that, you know, she
mm,
has in her life for the first however many years. And
yeah.
I think that's really key as well. And really, um I think
So
that,
some people might say though that that's appropriate when it's father daughter and even father son, right? And you might even go so far as to say mother daughter and mother son. That yes, you are protective of your children, right? And so yes, you will walk on the road side of the footpath, and your child is on the on the other side. So if someone gets hit, it's more likely to be the adult first.
mm,
But I wonder, I can imagine, and I'm just hearing in my mind, because of the work that I do, I get this a fair bit. Well, that's appropriate for children, but what about for adults? Because women, why should a man, and some men out there as well might say, well, why should I put myself in the, and this is, I think, at the depth of what we're talking about, why should I put myself at risk for you when you constantly tell me that you can do it yourself and you don't need me, and you don't need me to protect you, and you don't need me to look after you because you're independent and you're this and you're that and you're something else. But then when it's not done, when the action isn't performed, it's like, well, doesn't he love me? Doesn't he care for me? Isn't there that sense of I want to look after you, and that sense of compassion and being held and all of that?
mm. And this is the beautiful thing that is about the subliminal messaging. And like you
Yep,
said, you know, if I'm walking with my children, I'd walk roadside. So it's actually, a chivalrous act can be just a loving act, and also an act of
absolutely.
politeness. So if I'm walking up to a door, just because I'm a woman, I don't shut the door behind me. I hold the door for whoever's coming.
Yeah,
You know, like it's
yeah,
actually a polite kind of way of being in our environment. And that's as well a bigger issue that I think we're losing, because we're so busy judging and putting meaning to things
mm,
that
mm,
really are the beautiful sides of our society. So that now it's kind of a bit dog eat dog, that we're not prepared to do anything nice because it might be misconstrued as being that you think I'm dependent, or that I need you, or these other things exist around it. Now,
yep,
within that, there's been a lot of misogyny within chivalry back in the day, of course, as well. So we're talking about modern chivalry. We're not
yeah,
talking about
absolutely.
things that are kind of like, oh, hang on, that's condescending. It's a very, very big difference between condescending behavior and politeness and like a gallant act,
Mm,
where
mm,
somebody says,
mm.
oh, let me get that for you, and I think deep within us as women, there's this kind of like, oh, it really, it is a softening, I think, for a
Yep.
woman to feel that from a man.
So where do you think the line is, Helen? As from a woman's perspective, where do you think the line is? So let's just take the classic first date, okay, that a man and a woman might have. So a man will turn up to a woman's, and this is, we want to talk about chivalry at its very core, right? And what would be what would be the most chivalrous way for a man to behave on a first date? And this is my perception. So for context, I'm 46 and I grew up in the 70s into the 80s, and I was brought up by very traditional Italian parents that taught me all this stuff, right? And this is just the way that you do things, but it's very different. So I'm going to paint a picture here for a second. So I might turn up to this woman's home, and this is, and maybe I wouldn't do all of this, but this is the ultimate in chivalry.
No, go for it,
So
Michael. I want to
I
know
might, I
all of
might,
it.
awesome. So I'll turn up to her home. I'm married now, right? But if I was dating, this is what I might do. And so I'd turn up to her home to pick her up with a bunch of flowers, and she would be dressed however she's dressed, and I'd be saying, "You look beautiful." So I'd give her the flowers. She'd put them inside. We'd walk out to the car. I'd open the door for her, and then she'd get into the car. I'd close the door. I'd go around the car, get in. We drive to where we're going. I would walk around the car and open the door for her. And then as we're walking into, say, a restaurant, I would open the door of the restaurant and allow her to go in first. And then I would announce to the person, or tell the person who we are, we've got a reservation, et cetera, et cetera. We'd sit down. Usually the waiter would actually pull the chair out for the woman. And this still happens in restaurants, right? At nice restaurants, the waiter still pulls out the chair, not for the man, but for the woman.
Mm,
So even ingrained in our society is that little aspect of chivalry, and we call that good customer service in a restaurant.
that's right.
And then I think what I'd do then is we would order our food. I would allow her to order first, and then at the end of it, I would pay for the meal, and then take her home. And then who knows what happens after that? However,
If you do all of that, you're in a pretty good position, Michael.
you would hope so, wouldn't you? You would hope so, Helen. And so I wonder I wonder what's wrong with that, because then you might see women say, well, why can't I pick up the man? Right?
Mm.
Why is it not okay for the man to receive flowers? Why can't I open the door for the man? Who
Yeah.
says that I can't look after myself to the point where I can afford to pay for my own damn meal?
Mm.
Right? So
But this is
yeah.
the energy that's being attached to this behavior, right? And so we have a personal responsibility to look at our own behaviors towards acts. So if we're weighting people's behavior as an attack on our independence, on our femininity, on our standing, on our ability to do things for ourselves, well, it's not really the right energy. If you're looking at somebody as an act of kindness, of generosity, of an act of chivalry, of an act of caring, then the energy that you look within that, there's a softness with that, of kind of like, oh, wow, And I think most women that I speak to really, really miss being treated that way, because it makes them feel like that king queen stereotype, and the queen in the moment, and in turn then they want to hold the king, so it is this beautiful energy exchange, but you have to go in that with the right energy of receiving. And I think that's a difficult thing for a lot of us now. We're not used to receiving, and so much of what's done now, acts of kindness, aren't expected to just be done for nothing. There's a kind of, is this going to be reciprocated? And I love that saying, if you're doing kindness to expect something in return, you're doing business, not kindness, right?
Yeah. I
So
like that.
chivalry is about pure giving, and then the person receiving, without the energy of it being offensive. So things which might be offensive that I would think, hang on a minute, that's a bit too far, is if, for example, then as one day it's like, no, I'd like to pay for this today. Then, the man can say, okay, that would be really nice. And that allows that if that's important to that lady, then that's what she does. And there's not a point where you're not allowed to pay. It's always me, I'm the man.
Yep.
So it's about then working out the people's relationship, their personalities, what's important to each other, what level of independence do they want to have around those things. And then respecting that, it comes back to respect. Right. So if chivalry is then going to remove a right from your partner that it's important to her to have that, then that's overstepping and that's condescending. Yep. It's taking away something that's important. And I think that for me, my belief for myself is that that's where the line is what are you taking? Is it just a receiving or actually removing something that's important to me?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that there's also there's that chivalrous aspect that men would love to be able to bring forward. But then from our point of view as well, and I think this is where a lot of women might get stuck in this. It's like, well, I can allow him to do all of that for me. And yes, it feels good. But then I feel like there's a pressure and expectation where, when he drops me off at home, that I've got to invite him in. And maybe I don't want to on the first date. Maybe I want to have some self-respect and wait till the third, fourth, or fifth date before I allow things to go that far, right?
Personal boundary.
And well, that's a personal boundary. But then you've got, and this is where I want to speak into men and this masculinity within men that says, well, if I do this for you, like how many times do I have to pay for a meal? How many times do I have to buy you bloody flowers? How many times have I got to pick you up? How many times have I got to do all this stuff before that's going to happen, right? And I think that speaks into what you were talking about before around expectations. If we remove the expectations from the interaction and we instead place boundaries on this and kind of go, well, and the woman might go, well, I'm happy to be served. I'm happy for you to be chivalrous. And the man says, well, I'm happy to do this with no expectation, but at some point I want to know that the relationship is progressing rather than me just, being a bank account, right? Where we go out for dinner and you get everything done for you. But I want to know that the relationship is progressing.
And I think as well, that's really interesting to think that, well, what's in it for me then if I've done all these things for you? Really,
this is what a lot of men.
Yeah. And there's nothing in it for you apart from really feeling good that you behaved well. Yeah. And we're not used to just feeling good about behaving well. And a lot of what we're seeing people, you can't have both ends. You can't complain that you're not being appreciated and you're not allowed to open doors without being kind of rebuked, without then saying, well, I'm doing it for no reason. And that really goes back into then that kind of the shadow of that hero, where there's that expectation that how come you didn't see me? And so that then there's an anger comes from that. There's a resentment because really the hero wants to be seen and revered, So the shadow of that then is the kind of resentment and the anger that it's not being seen or noticed, and that they then are playing being the nice guy, but it's not real. And that's when it starts to go under because they're just wanting to get the return. And I suppose on a feminine level, really, it's about really appreciating and seeing that, saying, oh, thank you for opening the door for me. I really liked that, and thank you for doing that for me. And, oh, you're behaving so beautifully. And then complimenting back, you look really handsome, thank you for opening the door for me, and stuff like, for me, sometimes it's nice if your partner orders your meal for you. It depends on if you kind of say, can you order tonight? And that's done. But then equally as well, if there's a time when you don't want to do that, you can say, oh, do you mind me meeting you there tonight rather than me picking you up? I'm so sorry, I'm under the pump. And there's this beautiful interchange of knowing that normally they would do this, this, and this, but it doesn't have to happen all the time for you to know that you're still
Yep.
loved in that way.
Mm.
And that there has to be, and I know that there is a feminine energy that is all receiving and not giving, and that there's
Yep.
all about the man doing this for me and I am the queen, and that's not the case either. You know, that's not okay.
Yeah, it definitely has to be a I was going to say a one-way street. It definitely has to be a two. That's a one-way street. I was saying it definitely has to be a two-way street
Yeah.
here, because there's got to be that. You're right. There's got to be the giving and the receiving, a real reciprocal energy there, I think. And
Mm,
then we step into something that's really quite powerful, and very bonding and connective for both people.
mm,
Uh, and to speak into what you talked about earlier around what happens when that's not the case, is we then come up with, there's then you talked into this, there's then resentment that comes up, and then there's expectation, there's entitlement as well.
mm,
And with that comes frustration and anger. So I think the message from this really is chivalry dead, or did we kill it? I don't think chivalry is dead. I think chivalry is still alive and strong in
mm,
most men, and
mm,
in a real powerfully loving way, right?
mm,
Is it, are we killing it? I think we're killing it. I think we are killing it. I don't think it's dead, but I think we are killing it.
mm,
And the way that we're killing it is by setting up expectations around, what how a woman wishes to be served, and then the expectations around a man's, in within the man serving as well.
mm, mm,
What would you say to
mm.
that?
Yeah, and I think that it's really a shame that we're killing it. And I would say to everybody, really, to men, open doors, open cars,
Absolutely,
offer
go
to pay
for
for
it.
dinner, do beautiful
Yep,
things, and don't let an energy from another person destroy that for you, because that's
yep,
always about them and not about you.
yep.
And I think it's really important that as women, we start to remove the male being the enemy and the male being
Yeah.
condescending and everything that the man does being an attack in some way, that we can
Mm,
fall into our softness. We don't always have to be on and in our masculine ourselves. It's nice to accept
yep.
something. If a woman opened a door from me because she was just standing there and she opened it and I walked through, would I have an attachment to that? Probably not. So why is an attachment if a guy does it for me? And so
Yep.
it's all the history that comes behind that, and to recognize then that that's a historical hurt or issue or
Mm.
resentment from ourselves, and not to bring that energy onto some poor guy who just thought he was being nice,
Yeah, yeah,
So,
right. And from a man's point of view as well, it's like, do these things, definitely do these things, but also pay attention to the response you get. Not that we need to look for validation and approval by doing so, but if you go to open a door for a woman and she says, no, 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 I can do that myself, pay attention to that. If you
mm,
then go to the restaurant and it's your first date and there's something around pulling the chair out, or allowing her to order first, or paying for dinner or whatever, like, pay attention.
mm,
And I think we can all pay attention to the intention behind what people are doing and the energy that it's coming from,
mm,
and how that person responds to these acts of courtesy, these acts of compassion and love
mm,
as well.
mm,
And I know many, 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 many years ago, this was a red flag for me. I know. I remember myself and this woman were walking along South Bank. It was in the middle of winter, and I took my jacket off and I went to put it. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "You look cold." And she said, "Well, yes, but I'm fine. I can look after myself. I should have just brought a jacket with me." And she said, "But if you take off your coat, you'll be cold." I said, "No, I'm good. I've got plenty.
mm,
I'm good." She said, "No, I don't need your jacket. I don't need you to keep me warm. I can keep myself." And it was in that moment I thought, yes, you're probably right. You can keep yourself warm, but you could have just been accepting of that in that
mm,
moment.
mm.
And that relationship didn't last very much
Yeah,
longer,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because there
And
was nothing there for me to do. There was no purpose for me to be there, because
mm,
she could do everything herself.
mm.
You're right. So,
Yeah, and there's a real sadness about that, actually, for me when I hear about that,
mm,
because um, again, it goes back to that care of the other person,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
and it is really a very caring thing. So then to have that received and to be grateful and to go, I don't have an issue with being supported. I think
Yep.
it's beautiful. Um, Although I'm quite a tough person because I have to be independent in a lot of different ways. So I
Mm.
don't align it as being in the same energy. I
Yep.
am very independent and I truly believe I can pretty much do most things on my own. But the thought that I might not have to is lovely, right?
Isn't that
So,
powerful? Isn't that
mm,
powerful? There's
yeah.
so much power. There's so much power in that strong feminine that can say, I can do it myself, but if you would like to do it for me, I can accept that.
Mhm.
Knowing that that doesn't in any way compromise me as a strong, independent woman. There's
Yeah.
so much strength in that, isn't there?
Mm, mm.
Yep.
And this is the thing, it's the energy that you bring to it. It belongs to
Yep.
us. And if the
Yep.
the man is offering on the energy of like, I'm doing this from love and kindness, I don't have any expectation. And the woman can receive and say, and I'm taking this and I'm not having any entitlement.
Yep.
To have that beautiful interchange that it brings him power to feel needed and received, and it brings power for the woman to feel seen and loved.
Mm.
And you know, there's a lot to be said for that protective layer, and it's not just being protected by the man, but it's being protected within the relationship, because women
Yep.
protect men in a very different way. We protect from our heart space. We create a safe
Absolutely.
space for men to come into with their emotion, and then we
Yep.
can protect their heart within our relationship, whereas men protect almost from the outside in. Women kind of protect from the inside out, and I think that's a really
Mm.
beautiful thing to be able to kind of balance in a relationship.
I want to ask you one last question on this, Helen, from a woman's perspective. Now, I was doing some relationship coaching just the other day with a couple, and she said to me, she said, it started to feel like it was becoming controlling. So if he wouldn't allow me, sorry, if I wouldn't allow him to do something for me because I wanted to do it myself, he would get really upset,
Mm,
right? And it started to feel controlling and suppressive,
yeah.
and I felt like I was trapped, right? Can I ask you, at what point do you think it gets to it stops being chivalrous and it starts being controlling,
Mm,
or
yeah.
appears that way?
Well, I think it goes back to what we said before, noticing, is this what's
Mm.
important to you? And if you want to take charge of that because it's important to you, go for it. It's
Yep.
not, my politeness and my chivalry isn't needed, and yet I'm still fully present and here in this relationship.
Yep.
And so it then depends on the kind of the connotation in which it's being done, and
Yep.
where the masculine in that relationship is struggling, that they need to overcompensate with the control in an area where it's not needed, in
Yeah.
order
Right.
to then
Okay.
feel wounded when they're not received. So
Mm.
if there's a wounding there of not being received, that then causes another different kind of energy that brings in a more argumentative, and then it becomes a push pull of power. But I want to do it. No, but I want to do it. Nobody's
Yep.
right. But it's not
Yep.
about the act, is it? It's always about something else. So if it's
Absolutely.
about putting the light bulb in, and I don't want you to put the light bulb in, I'll do the light bulb. Well, why can't I do
Yep.
the light bulb? It's got nothing to do with the light bulb. At some point, somewhere, there's a power struggle. And that comes from somebody either being too controlling or somebody else not feeling seen. All these other like incidences that happen,
Mm.
and it manifests in it being about a particular thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
about digging through as to find out what the balance is within the relationship, who feels seen and received and heard and loved, and how they're holding that.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So really, what it comes down to is, if as a woman, if a woman can be open to receive, and a man can step into, I guess, service, because chivalry is really service, without any expectation attached to it, then we can create a beautiful dance between a man and a woman, in a relationship, can't we?
Mm. Yeah, and then to watch the shadow of that, watch the resentment from the
Yep.
beauty, and then watch the entitlement from the reception, because that's where it gets icky. So if we can be
Yep.
really honest in ourselves as to kind of like, I'm starting to kind of treat him a bit bad because I expect this. Surely
Yep.
that can't feel good for him.
Mm.
And if it's kind of like, I'm starting to get a bit resentful because I feel like I'm being nice to her all the time, then start to look at that. So it's about,
Yep.
you know, always dancing in the shadow as well as the light,
Yeah, I
because
love that.
that's where all of the difficulty starts, and owning
Yep.
our part in that. But certainly, as far as I'm concerned, chivalry is not dead and shouldn't be. And
I totally agree with you.
I think we should revive it, put it on life
Yep,
support.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that's probably a good place to finish up then. So that was a really good discussion, Helen.
Mm,
And I'm looking
great.
forward to our next one next week as well.
Awesome. I look forward to it. Thanks,
Cool.
Michael.
And if you, thank you, Helen. And if you're watching this and you enjoyed it, please feel free to subscribe and share this with anyone you think might get any value out of it.
Awesome. Awesome.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very
See you
much.
next week.
Bye.